Hey, what's going on? It's Michelle. Hey, what's going on? It's Michelle Allen of A Sharp Photo, the one and only plus size certified photographer in the world. So I wanted to talk to you today about using your DSLR to make video. So at one point in time, most DSLRs did not shoot video. And then they started shooting video and it was, now we're at a point where a decent number of DSLRs can shoot really good video, right? But there's some things that you need to know, because most people who, like me, I'm a still shooter primarily, but I've started using my DSLR more for video now. But there's a bit of a learning curve. So I kind of want to help you with that and give you some information that will jump in the video. It's easy just to kind of click it over to the video setting, but if you don't know exactly how video works, you're not going to get good video. And it's going to feel like, oh, well, this camera can't. No, the camera can. It's the shooter. All right. So a couple things. Depending on what you have, most cameras will automatically shoot 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. And I don't know if all, like my camera, I have a 7D Mark II, it shoots 60 frames per second. And you can get DSLRs that'll go up to, like, I think 120 frames per second. All right. What does this mean? Okay, so first of all, frames per second. If you ever did it in elementary school or middle school, you know what a flip book is? You know, when you draw a picture, like let's say it's supposed to be of a person, draw the one picture with the hands down, and you keep drawing pictures of the person moving kind of up through this until their hands are up over their head, right? So 24 frames per second is what you normally watch movies in. That means that every second there are 24 still images. So it's like a flip book. It's like grrr. That's, I mean, think about when you watch like film of old movies being shot and you hear that kind of flickering sound. So that's basically what it is. Every second, 24 images go by. All right. So then 30 frames per second, same thing. 60 frames per second, same deal. All right. So why are we shooting in these different frame rates? That's what it's called. It's called a frame. And you can questions in the chat. If I don't answer them right now, I'll answer your questions, later when I come back through. All right. 24 frames per second is generally what film is shot in. 30 frames per second, that's generally what television is shot in. And it's just for the look. It has a particular look when you shoot at these different frame rates. And then once you go into 60 frames per second, it looks more like what real life looks like. But also, once you get to 60 frames per second and higher is when you can do slow-mo. Why? Because once you get to 60 frames per second, you can slow it down or you can stretch it out to 24 frames per second. And it takes all of those frames, because remember, it's a flip book, right? So if 24 frames per second is here, every frame goes by. 30 is here, 60 is here. So in that second, you have 60 frames go by. So if you render that at 24 frames per second or stretch it out, then it takes longer for those 60 frames to go by, if that makes sense to you. All right. So this is important because, and just a side note, I see people try to do slow-mo like on their phones, and I've done it before where I shot something and I tried to do it in slow motion, but I didn't have the frame rate high enough. So then it's choppy. Why is that? Well, because there are gaps. So if you have 24 frames per second, which is the slowest it's going to go, and you stretch it, then 4 frames, maybe you have 20 frames, or maybe you have 12 frames. So the rest of those frames basically fill in with blank spaces. So then you get the skipping because there's not enough. So that's why it's not smooth enough. So the other thing you do when you shoot video is there's a rule basically to make the frame rate shoot correctly. Whatever the frames per second you choose, your shutter speed needs to be double that. So, or at least double that, right? If it's too high, it's a little funny too, but if it's too low, it doesn't work at all. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed needs to be at a 50th of a second. All right, 30, a 60th. 60 frames per second, you need of a second. All right, so that's the whole frame rate issue. All right. Also, light for video is different. So if you're a still shooter, you're accustomed to using your speed light or your flash, which dumps in a whole bunch of light in a very short amount of time. So it's almost unlimited in what it can handle, right? So, I mean, it knows what it's doing, and of course, the better the strobe or the speed light you're using, the more you're going to be able to light. But with video, you need continuous light. So you may, if you're like me, have lighting already. I know when I started, I bought a kit, for photography, and then, it wasn't great for what I needed. So I ended up kind of shoving it and throwing it to the side. And then I started doing video, and I was like, I have light. I have light that I could use. I plugged it in and I used it. But video seems to need a lot of light because, it depends on the camera you use, but you do have some flexibility with ISO, but you want to be really careful and not crank that ISO too much depending on the camera that you have. So same rules where you want to try to keep the ISO lower if you can. And of course, the lower the ISO, the less exposed it's going to be. And you need more light. But of course, depending on what you're doing, you don't want harsh light. So you need softbox, which is going to, of course, these are just things to consider. As far as exposure, it's a really different game. And don't fool around and go outside because it's different but the same, right? So if you're outside, you got to pull the exposure down to bring the background down, but then you got to light your subject, and it's a little bit more tricky to, it's not the lighting part that's tricky, it's carrying light around. So your speed light has batteries, you either put it on top of your camera or you put it on a light stand and you put it near the subject. Continuous light, you need batteries, but you need a whole lot more. What I use, and I'll actually put the link to it in the comments. I use an LED panel for like this. If you got to light a whole body, I don't know about that. It does okay. It's pretty good. But the reason I like LED panels in general is because they don't generate a lot of heat. So if you're in a small space, you don't have to worry about the space heating up, and the temperature's cool. I like the color temperature. You use something like tungsten is going to be really orange. The LED panel is almost neutral. It's a little blue, but that's something that you can handle in camera. So that's another thing that's the same. Color temperature. You just have to make a decision. So it's not about what's right, it's about what you want. And video takes up a lot of battery power because, when you snap and you don't know how you got your camera set, your camera falls asleep. So it's fine. Video, it's just rolling. So when you have video, you want to make sure you have 2 or 3 backup cameras, backup batteries to go with it. The last thing I'll say that you need to consider is when you're shooting video, it most DSLRs only, what do they let you? I think they let you shoot up to, oh, well, so my camera, the way it does it is it lets you shoot up to 4 GB before it stops and splits the clip and opens up another one, which it doesn't affect you when you're shooting. You don't see it. Like when you pull it into Final Cut or Adobe Premiere or whatever, you'll see 2 clips, but they'll just roll right over the but some type of agreement. It's a legal thing where they're like, well, is this a still camera or a video camera? If it's a video camera, you can't keep rolling. So it's like it has the capability of doing it, but they've created it so that it won't do it, so that it doesn't compete with video cameras. That's a legal thing. It has nothing to do with the job that you're going to do. But yes, so just to recap, all right, video cameras, you have to be aware of your frame rate. And then along with your frame rate, you have to be aware of the shutter speed. The shutter speed needs to be double the frame rate. You need light, a lot of it, and it needs to be continuous. All right. And lastly, what was the last thing that I said? I forgot the last thing that I said. Well, the replay, frame rate, shutter speed, lots of light, and of course, stabilization. You know, you're going to want like a tripod or what do you call it? A gimbal or something like that. Even I bought a shoulder rig, you know, something that keeps you from shaking. You don't realize how much you're shaking, you know, but you do shake plenty if you're just trying to handhold. There are techniques for hand holding, but I would recommend, you know, just getting a tripod, you know, and things like that. And getting those things can be expensive. So it wouldn't hurt to just start with just a tripod and get a video head. Video head is not the same as a photo head. It doesn't move the same way. So you need so that you can move along with video smooth. So that's a lot. So I'll probably, give you more about video over time, but that's pretty much it for now. So like I said, video is cool, and it's definitely something great to add to your arsenal, because a lot of people that shoot stills don't do video. They don't want to do video because it's, like I said, it's very different. It's a whole different setup. Ooh, trying to do video and photo in the same session, it's a physical shift in terms of the materials and the things you have, and it's also a mental shift, you know. So yeah, that's it. So listen, if you have questions, like I say, put them in the chat. If I don't answer them right away, I'll answer them later. So eyes up, stay sharp.